Good afternoon. Welcome to Farm Credit Illinois' first program of the year as part of our Ag Minded Hour series. The intent of this series is to offer you timely topics and information that's easily digestible over the noon hour while you take lunch or go about your day. A little food for thought, you could say. Before we dive right into today's topic, let's take a moment to introduce our presenters this hour. With us today, we have Chris West, President of Franken West Environmental Engineers, and Carrie Fraley, agriculture engineer, also with Franken West. Franken West specializes in assisting agricultural clients by providing design and permitting services for their farms or facilities. Whether you are thinking about building now or have a dream 20 years down the road, we are certain you'll take some great information away from today's webinar. Before I hand it to our speakers this hour, I'd like to point out the question feature in your participant panel. If you have a question at any point, type it in that box and a moderator will get back to you, or it'll be addressed during the question and answer session at the end. Now I will turn it over to Chris and Carrie.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Chris West. I am the president of Franken West Environmental Engineers. I am a licensed engineer in Illinois, also in Indiana and Missouri. Originally, I am from White County down in southeastern Illinois. And my family still farms a row crop farm but down in White County and in Gallatin as well. So, Carrie?
Yep, I am actually from Calhoun County, and my family farms. We have had hogs and cattle over the years, just down to cattle now, but mainly peach and large vegetable garden operation. But I've been working with Chris for about 10 years now, and prior to that, I worked with the USDA NRCS for 11 years.
So what we thought we would do today is give you a kind of a general rundown of the current regulations that you might be coming against or coming in contact with, as well as the agencies that oversee those regulations. So in the agricultural industry, typically what we deal with is the Illinois Department of Agriculture for permitting of livestock structures, for on-farm fertilizer and chemical storage, or for commercial ag chem facility permits. We also have the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, and that is more when you have issues of a release of some type. They also do co-reviews of the ag chem permits through the Department of Ag, on-farm fuel storage. Once you reach a certain size that we'll discuss a little later, they oversee that as well. And then, livestock structures when there's a manure spill, or their general annual inspections. And then we'll also discuss the Natural Resource Conservation Service through the USDA and the funding options that are out there for livestock facilities. So we'll start off with the Department of Ag. So basically, anytime that you're looking to build a structure that has livestock in it, or has the waste, the manure from the animals, has to be permitted through the regulations that are defined within the Livestock Management Facilities Act. So we'll reference the LMFA frequently today, probably. And that's a series of regulations that were developed in the mid to late 90s that oversaw or laid out the regulations for all livestock structures within Illinois. And it's typically designed around or regulated around an animal unit, which is just a unit of measure for each different type of animal to try to make them the calculation of how many animal units are on a facility easier than just counting the animals. So when we're talking about a livestock facility, we're typically dealing with two different types. One, it's entirely brand new, so there's nothing there. You're just building a new barn new holding pond, new lagoon, whatever that may be, out in the field. So entirely brand new. So when we're doing that, we have several different things that the regulations call out. The first is setbacks. So this was it's a series of dimensions or lengths from distances from the planned facility to the nearest resident or series of residents, depending on what we're talking about. But we start out with 1/4 mile. So on a new facility, we have 1/4 mile setback from any residence that's not directly associated in the ownership of that planned farm. Go ahead. Then we also have, one of the next options that we'll talk about is an expansion. So if you have farm buildings, livestock structures already existing, and you're looking to add another building to that farm, then we have a couple of rules that define what that expansion is. And it can be a new expansion or a regular expansion per se. And the rule that we go by on this is when you're expanding any facility, when you're adding a new barn or any livestock waste storage type structure to an existing facility, if the new part of that, what you're proposing, is more than half in financial value of everything that you've got there already, plus the new, then it's going to be considered a new expansion. And then there's other things that we have to do for that. So general rule of thumb, what I try to say when we're talking with clients on this, just to make the numbers big and round, if you have an existing facility that it would cost you $50,000 to rebuild today, exactly like it is, but in today's dollars, then you can expand that facility at $1 less than $50,000 and still be considered an expansion. If you go more than that, then it's a new expansion. And then we'll have, go ahead. So here are the requirements for when we're putting together new facilities or expansion facilities, as far as what's required to be submitted for that new farm. We have application forms, basically the paperwork that we submit to the Department of Ag for the proposed farm. Those highlight what you're going to do, where it's going to be at, who your neighbor is, who the closest business, non-farm business, that type of thing. We have construction plans for what you're proposing. So basically anything that the manure is going to touch, we have to provide plans for that, that the Department of Ag will review and approve. A site investigation. So if you're one of those new facilities, whether it's brand new or the new expansion, we're required to do soil borings within the proposed footprint of the new building. Also look at floodplain, we look at karst area. There's a few things that we look at from national lists to make certain that you don't fall within those areas. And if you're new and then also large enough, so over 1,000 animal units, we briefly talked about the animal units earlier, but if you're over 1,000 animal units, then you would be subject to a potential public informational meeting. So that 1,000 animal unit threshold, just very generally, if you're talking about beef, that's 1,000 head of beef. If you're talking about swine, that's roughly 2,500 adult swine that would meet that 1,000 animal unit threshold. One of the other things that is required, and this will come into effect also when we talk about the EPA a little bit later, is a waste management plan. So these are detailed plans of all of the manure applications from your farm, both new and expansion facilities. So this really doesn't matter if you're building one from scratch or if you've already got one in place. Based on that animal unit threshold again, if you're less than 1,000 animal units, you're not required to have one on site. If you're greater than 1,000 animal units, you are required by the LMFA again to have a nutrient or a waste management plan on site. If you're greater than 5,000 animal units, so that's getting up there to a fairly large size, then not only are you required to have one on site, but you have to submit it to the Department of Ag for review and approval. So once we can get away from the livestock end of things here just a little bit and talk about on-farm storage of ag chemicals. So bulk fertilizers, bulk pesticides. There are regulations that came into place in 2002 that detail what's required as far as secondary containment for those chemicals. And on-farm storage, just the definition of that, it's a permanent site that's designed and used for the non-commercial, and that's an important aspect of this. So only on-farm storage of pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers for more than 45 consecutive days in a single non-mobile container that exceeds certain capacities. So you might have a single container, you might have multiple containers that would all meet that capacity, or if any of them individually meet that capacity. That's where this secondary containment comes into place. So those capacities differ depending on what you're storing. If you're looking at bulk liquid pesticides, 300 gallons, dry pesticides in bulk, 300 pounds. If you're looking at bulk fertilizers, 5,000 gallons in liquid or 50,000 pounds in a bulk dry fertilizer. So any of those for on-farm storage, you would be required under the current regulations to have a secondary containment of that. So that could be a bermed storage with a concrete floor. It also could be a concrete walled structure with a concrete floor. There's many different ways to meet that containment parameter, but these are the capacities where you have 45 days or consecutively of any or all of these. I mentioned earlier about the commercial aspect of this. So this on-farm storage is intended only for someone's personal use on the farm. If you're looking to store that for sale to someone else, or if you're working with a local ag chem retailer and you're providing some storage on farm for them, then there are other regulations that come into play that are defined by the Illinois Pesticide Act. So this is only meant for on-farm storage and personal use of that. And this went into effect as far as the permit required and the secondary containment when it was deemed complete, the structure aspect back in 2005. So if you're looking to build something new, or if you have something that you've built but didn't know about the rules or never heard of it, if it was done after 2005, then we'd be happy to help you catch up to the current regulations. So an ag chemical facility. So we go back to the term of commercial purposes. This is your local ag retailer where they're selling, bulk fertilizers, chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, where they're stored in those similar type of facilities. But this is a commercial aspect of this, where you have 300 gallons of liquid pesticide, 300 pounds of dry for more than 30 days a year. So you can see where some of the differences start to come into play as far as the days of storage. And this was pursuant to the Illinois Pesticide Act and the Lawn Care Products Application Notice Act. So for facilities that are storing chemicals to be used on for residential, for golf courses, something like that, where we talk about the lawn care, similar to the ag chem, they're both provide permit as far as responsibilities for your permit and the design and construction of containment for all of those chemicals. Now we get into the Illinois EPA, and they typically look over or reside over the on-farm fuel storage, which is a little bit different than the ag chem on-farm storage. CAFO or NPDS permits. We'll get into that in a little bit. Manure release and spills, or their general EPA inspections. What we can look for. So on-farm fuel storages that are regulated. And again, what we're talking about is non-commercial. So you're storing the fuel on the farm for the use of the farm, more than 1,320 gallons in above ground containers or 42,000 gallons in buried containers. If you have either of those, then go ahead. Then the requirement that you would have would be you need to put in place and implement a spill prevention and control and countermeasure plan, so an SPCC plan. And that basically, there are several rules for that, but if we're talking about on-farm storage, the purpose of that is just to minimize the potential for any discharges, so any leaks from any of your fuel storage containers or piping. If you have between 1,000 and 10,000 gallons and there is no history of spills, then you can use a self-certifying plan. So you'd put the plan together, and then you can self-certify that you've met the requirements. If you're over 10,000 gallons in aggregate, then a professional engineer would be needed to either write, but at a minimum, certify that the plan meets the requirements and it has been constructed according to those. So your animal feeding operations, there's been a lot of terms used for this. You've heard CAFOs likely for the last 10 years or better. And it's just an animal feeding operation where animals are kept or raised in a confined area for more than 45 days in a 12-month period. In addition to that, if crops, vegetation, or forage growth is not sustained in the normal growing season over a portion of that lot, then they're also considered an animal feeding operation. So under the federal CAFO rule, a producer would be required to obtain a operation that proposes to discharge or that discharges permit. A lot's been said about this, not necessarily in the last few years, but 10 to 15 years ago, this really started, and there was a lot said about what was required, what's not required. So if you have a facility that is proposing to discharge, so if you have a livestock farm and you're proposing to discharge, then you would be required to get one of these discharge permits, what they call the CAFO permits. The thing in Illinois is, though, you're not allowed to discharge under any situation. So the sites that are required to have these permits are very small, almost minimal at best. The one protection that you have that helps to keep you out of this type of a permit situation is, one, that you don't discharge, and two, that you operate a nutrient management plan. So when we talked earlier under the Department of Ag regulations about the nutrient management plan and where it's required and where it's not, with the EPA and the Illinois EPA regulations, what they want to see in order for your protection, and I say your protections for the farm, is the farm operating under a nutrient management plan. That way you have plans on where every drop of manure, every gallon of manure, or every yard of solid manure is going, and you have plans for that, and it's based on analysis of that manure and the crop requirement, the nutrient requirement of that manure for whatever crop that you're growing. And there's different levels, different categories of a CAFO, which is a confined animal feeding operation. If you're less than 2,500 swine, that weigh 55 pounds or more, or if you have 10,000 that are less than 55 pounds, you're a small CAFO. Medium CAFO, 750 to 2,500 swine. And again, this is a kind of an animal unit place as well, where they're using animal units to determine the size. So we have small, medium, and large CAFOs. And really where that comes into place is what we're going to talk about next is the site visits. Actually, let's go into the manure spills first. We'll get back to those CAFO sizes here in just a second. So what do you do if you have a manure spill? What is considered a release? And what are my requirements? What am I supposed to do in the event that we do have one? And how can I prepare going forward? So a spill or release is considered any uncontrolled discharge to water of the on the ground, or to surface water, or to groundwater. Could be from a lagoon basin berm. So if you have an earthen structure of any type where the berm breaches and whatever is inside there is released into surface water of some type. Structural failure. So, barn breaks down. Again, berm breach, something structurally that fails that allows the manure to be outside of that structure. Runoff from open lots. So if you have a beef feedlot, a dairy feedlot, a hog feedlot, runoff from that, depending on where it goes, is could be considered a manure release. Let's say you're applying that manure in the fall or the spring to your farm fields, and you have a line rupture or something of that effect. So anything like that, an over application. So if we go back to the manure management plan or the nutrient management plan, and we talk about we're applying that manure based on the needs of the crop. If we over apply that, let's say a corn crop is going to get 5,000 gallons of a hog manure per acre, and we apply 10,000 gallons. So that's an over application. That could be an issue considered, or could be considered a manure release or a spill. Go ahead. So what do I do? What can we do to help prevent that? So if you do have a spill, look at the application or pumps that led to that, and we shut off those pumps that led to that discharge immediately. Repair any defective component of an earthen berm. If the material is in the application field, you construct an earthen berm so that you can contain that material. So the whole idea of this, well, what do I do if I have a spill, is containment. You want to keep it on your property. You want to keep it out of a ditch. You want to keep it, most certainly you want to keep it out of any water. Let's say it has reached those areas, a roadside ditch, a stream, a creek. What do we do at that point? So we were looking to minimize the impact as quickly as possible. So if you can get downstream of that and create some type of a small dam just to hold that in place until then you can come and remove it. So first thing to do, construct a temporary holding basin, down gradient of the release or spill. And then you come in and you pump that, collect that, so that you recover all of that material. And if you're in an application field, a good idea is to cover all your tile intakes so that it's not getting an avenue directly to the groundwater through the tiling system. And then again, recover as much of the manure as possible. Document everything. So if you have one of these incidents, document everything. Take pictures of what you've done, time and date of the release, amount discharged, amount recovered. that's a particularly important aspect of this, is how much. Because if you can prove that you've recovered the vast majority of what was discharged, you're in a much, much better place. So what are the reporting requirements? You're required to report the release to the IEPA within 24 hours of if you've got more than 25 gallons of livestock waste that are released, spilled, and unrecovered. So that's where we get into why it's important to recover as much as possible. Because even though you've spilled more than 25 gallons or had a release of that, if you've recovered that material or most of it, then you don't have to, you're not required to go through the reporting requirements. Now, if a release or spill, regardless of size, reaches waters of the state, then you have that requirement again. Waters of the state, stream, creek, river, of course, anything like that would definitely be considered waters of the state in this instance. How do I prepare? One of the things that we like to work with our clients about is to prepare and implement an emergency action plan. And this is contained within your nutrient management plan that we talked about earlier. So it looks at, what kind of structures, what kind of potential release areas you might have, and then put in place, earth moving contacts, custom applicator, manure applicator contacts, so that all of that stuff is readily available and at a common location within the farm, so that whether or not you're there, your farmhand's there, whoever is there that sees that, they would know in order, who do I have to call and what their numbers are, so we can get this road moving, so that we can recover as much of the material as possible. Discuss the plans ahead, with your contractors, with your employees, and it's also a decent idea to construct equipment ahead of time, such as tile intake covers. That way you've got them, everybody knows where they're at, and they can be used when you need them the most. So a comprehensive nutrient management plan. So earlier we talked about a nutrient management plan. A comprehensive management plan takes that nutrient management plan and adds a couple of additional items to that to help identify possible areas of resource concerns, and provide alternatives to those resource concerns that can help reduce the potential for a release then going forward. And the CNMP will also help you determine the rate at which manures can be applied. We talked about that a little bit earlier, but we introduce not only the manure analysis, but soil data from your farm fields, as well as the setback areas within your farm field. So if you've got tile risers, if you've got a stream running through your field, setbacks from those would also be identified in this comprehensive nutrient management plan. Inspections. So one of the things that we hear routinely from our clients is, will the EPA come? Will they inspect? Will they come and do an inspection on my farm? What can I do? What should I have in place? How can I prepare for that? One of the most important things that you can do as a livestock producer in the state is to have a current comprehensive nutrient management plan for your livestock facilities, because that does offer you a level of protection in the case that you do have a release or a manure release from your application fields per se. And how that helps is, the way the regulations read: if you are operating your farm according to this nutrient management plan, and you have records of it, the document that you've done so, and we get a large storm, large rain event, unexpected, that comes after you've done the application and you get runoff from your fields, well, that nutrient management plan offers you some protection from that event if you can document everything. That's one of the key things. Is it's not enough just to have the plan, but you need to be able to show that you've one, you've implemented the plan and you're using it according to what the plan says. So again, going back to that application scenario earlier, if you're actually applying at 5,000 gallons an acre versus 10,000, and you can show that, then you've proven that you're operating according to that plan, that all the manure applications are based on manure and soil analysis, and that you're meeting those setback requirements within the fields that you're applying on. So now what I'd like to do is turn the webinar over to Carrie and let her walk you through the NRCS and the EQIP program.
Okay. So NRCS offers numerous programs, but one of the main program that Chris and I deal with our clients is the EQIP, or the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And this is just a program that you can voluntarily sign up for, and it provides financial and technical assistance to producers. It's not only for livestock producers, but we deal mainly in the area of the livestock producers. And it's not a cost share program like people used to think of it. All payments are, you know, ahead of time before you get into this what your payment will be. It's an incentives program. It's not based on the cost of practices that you implement. It's not a percentage of that. It's actually an incentive. So it's pretty, you know exactly what you're getting into before you sign contracts for this program. And another thing that's good to know is applications for this program can be signed at any time throughout the year. It doesn't have to be, you know, in October or November. It can be at any time. And if your application expires before you move forward, the USDA, the local NRCS office, will have you sign a new application. There are a lot of different practices that are available for incentive payments, but the main ones that we deal with our clients are CNMPs. And like Chris said before, the CNMP, or the Comprehensive Nutrient Management Plan, it addresses concerns with waste storage, land treatment. So if you have erosion in your crop fields that you are applying manure to, things like water and sediment control basins or terraces, those are, you know, things that we look at. And nutrient management. So we evaluate your existing soil test, your manure samples, and give recommendations based on your cropping rotations for manure applications. So the CNMPs are they catch all. They're not your, you know, if EPA shows up just because you have it, it's not your fix all, but it should catch all to help you do the best that you can on your farm. Next would be ag energy plans, and I feel like these are kind of newer in the last 5 to 10 years. These are plans that you can have written for your farm that do an evaluation of energy efficiency. So your motor for your grain elevator, your curtains for your hog buildings, the insulation in your attic, the heaters in your hog buildings. Those are all things that this would you would have an audit done on the energy efficiency of your facility. There's cost share available for waste storage structures, and these can be earthen, concrete, settling basins, lagoons. We don't do many of those anymore, but yeah, any type of waste storage structure. There's cost share if you are shutting down open lots. So if you have a concern of runoff from an open lot, and you are going to shut the lot down and put animals in a confinement building, there is cost share for the roof structure over the storage area. There's cost share for associated practices to these things, like guttering systems, curbing around open lots, access roads to get to waste storages. There's cost share to shut down, and a lot of with EQIP, they want to be addressing resource concerns. So to get cost share for these items, you have to address something. And the majority of the time with waste, with livestock, the concern is runoff of manure. And in order to address that, you would need to be shutting down something. So if you're feeding on a dirt lot, you would be shutting that lot down, removing the fence, removing the waters, and seeding it, or working with your local office and incorporating it into a grazing system. Another concern a lot of people have, mainly on the hog side, but we do also do this with cattle, dairy and beef side, and that's mortality for facilities or a composter for dead animals. Rendering seems to be getting less available or maybe more costly, so there's options for on-site composting of animals, and the systems work very well for producers. There's also cost share. Say your fields are not right next to your site and you're seeing that your soil tests are getting really high next to your site. There's cost share to install solid pipeline below ground to fields. They can be right there next to your site or further away. The pipelines, and there's cost share for the pumps too, but there'd be risers at your field edges where you can either connect a drag line to or have your fill stand out in the field, so you're not hauling manure as far either with equipment, with heavy equipment. Buying in at agronomic rates, and those are things that you can get an incentive payment for. Under the ag energy side of things, like I mentioned before, there's incentive payments for replacing curtains, heaters, building insulation, lighting in your buildings and outside, grain dryers, fans, the ventilation fans or the pit fans, and your electric motors. And then also something that people don't realize as much when it comes to the livestock side of things is the ability to qualify for incentive payments on land treatment practices. So like I said before, you know, a wasp cob or a grade stabilization structure. Okay. So incentive payment rates change on a yearly basis. So each practice has an incentive payment cap with the total payment of all of the practices not to exceed the EQIP funding cap. So, you know, an example of a payment cap for a waste storage facility. So anything that holds or contains waste is, I think it is $200,000 per contract. So you could have 200,000, you could have practices that add up to 350,000 in incentive, but you're capped at that $200,000 of a payment. And again, these are things you know in advance going into it, how much of a payment you will receive for EQIP. So, you know, if you've got your information from your nutrient management plan, you can talk to your builders or contractors in the area, get an idea of this is what it's going to cost you to do this. Then you'll look at what your incentive payment's going to be and can make better decisions on whether you should move forward or not. So all of these things being said, when you're dealing with EQIP, in order to get an incentive payment for a nutrient management plan or any of those livestock confinement practices, for anything with ag energy, you are required to use a certified technical service provider. So there's a list, there's a registry for TSPs, you can select from that list, and that is, Chris and I are both technical service providers, so we're able to provide assistance to producers dealing with the EQIP program on this. The difference though with IDOA, the Department of Ag, and EPA, you're not required to be a certified TSP to do permitting or anything like that. This is more just an EQIP thing. So how do you get EQIP funding? So most people, you know, you go to your local USDA office and talk to your NRCS, and they're all very helpful. There's one in almost every single county, and you just tell them, you know, I have concerns. My cattle are on open lot, or my hog pit has cracks and I'm worried that it's leaking, and they will then most likely recommend that you talk with the TSP and get a CNMP written. There is incentives for the CNMP. Some people go through that and get the incentive payment for the CNMP, and some people do it on their own. There's always time involved. So step one would be to have a CNMP written. And if you're going through the EQIP, that could be a year to a year and a half long process before that part's complete. And then through that CNMP, the TSP, the person that writes the plan, will identify all of your resource concerns that are associated with your operation. And like I said, that's with your waste storage, that's with your land treatment, and that's with your nutrient management. So the CNMP will have all of these things listed. it would be submitted to the local NRCS office and then reviewed. And from that, they can take that plan and build a contract that would say what practices are needed to implement to address the concerns. The nice thing now is it's not a, if your CNMP says you need, you know, 2 waste storages and just different items that don't coincide with each other. You don't have to implement everything at one time. You can pick and choose. There's more to it that your NRCS office could elaborate on, but it's not a, I have to sign up for every single thing. Because some of these sites, you know, if they're different areas of the site are managed differently, could get pretty costly to address all the concerns. And it might be a 2 or 3 phase process that you don't want to get into all at one time. So, so the next question is, you know, say you're ready to build something, but you're in an EQIP contract. So when we work with clients, our first step is, you know, to have the CNMP completed, and that tells you what practices it is you're wanting to get cost share on, or, you know, incentive payments on and construct. So you have a contract with NRCS through the EQIP program, and it says you're going to do X, Y, and Z. Well, step 1 is to put together construction plans and have them approved by the Illinois Department of Ag. NRCS does require that you meet all of the state and federal rules and regulations. However, Department of Ag, they care that you have a roof over a waste storage if you're calling it solid manure, but they don't care about the design of the roof. So step 1 is getting your construction plans approved and permitted by the Illinois Department of Ag. And then the final set of plans that goes to NRCS is put together after we have an approved set from Department of Ag, because we definitely want to make sure we're meeting all the rules and regulations set forth by Department of Ag and EPA. So you have your permit from Department of Ag for the construction plans. Then we create a set of plans that will be submitted to NRCS. And with those, we have your waste storage, which was already approved. And then we have your supporting practices, such as the roof structure, the gutters, the access road, the waste closure, the waste transfer pipeline. Those are all part of the plans that we put together for approval that would be submitted to NRCS. So that kind of sums up a lot of information. That there's a lot of gray areas to everything I feel like we talked about, but that sums a lot of it up. And so I guess we'll hand it back over to you if anyone has questions.
Yeah, so we have had a couple questions come through. If you guys are ready for those. The first one was, in terms of fuel storage, is the 1,320 gallons total for combined tanks, or is that per tank? This member says he has a 500-gallon gasoline tank and a 1,000-gallon diesel tank.
And so that would be an aggregate. That would be an aggregate. So everything combined together.
Very good. Thank you. Someone else had asked, can you repurpose a hog manure lagoon for the use of cattle manure?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually very easy. A little bit depends on how long it's been since it's been used. But if you're going consecutively from hogs into cattle, there's really nothing really that you need to do. They can be repurposed for several things. We've repurposed old hog lagoons into freshwater ponds, so they can definitely be used for cattle manure.
Perfect. Everyone likes an easy answer. What are the biggest watch outs for the U.S. in the future when it comes to nutrient management, or what do you see coming on the horizon?
The waters of the state issue is something that's been discussed and fought over for years. And that, to me, as far as nutrient management going forward, that still is the main issue. You know, what's considered waters of the state? Because then we get into the release issue. It's been everything from a low area in your field that captures water when it rains. You know, at one point that was considered waters of the state, and you couldn't apply, or you couldn't have any runoff that made that. Roadside ditches, you know, that's been even though they're dry, that's been considered waters of the state issues. So, I think that those are continue to be one of the big issues going forward.
Definitely. I've heard a lot of talk surrounding that in our reading as well. So I appreciate you touching base on that. Someone did have a follow-up to the fuel question. They said, what are the requirements for fuel containment for, say, 1,500 total gallons? For example, what materials or construction, what might that look like?
So you've got a couple different potentials there. The easiest, let's say not the most financially, maybe not the most cost efficient one, is a reinforced concrete structure. So you have a concrete floor, concrete walled structure that you put the tank inside. That's one of the easiest ones. It's the easiest one to get a plan around and to certify. We do have options for earthen structures, but there are issues with that you have to prove and continually prove that soil is tight enough that if there is a release, that it can hold it in place and not leak through the soil. So that soil has to be really tight, and we have to continuously prove that going forward. But those are the two, and you can do steel structures as well. You can do a permeable or an impermeable liner within a structure. So some type of a rubber or a synthetic type of structure or a liner within any of those will work as well.
Very good. Thank you. I will see if anyone has any questions. Give anyone one last chance to submit questions in the question box before we let Chris and Carrie go today. All right, I am not seeing anything else come in. So with that, as we wrap up today, we want to give a big thank you to Franken West Environmental Engineers for sharing their expertise with all of us today. Our hope is that you will each leave with a useful takeaway or some food for thought as you look towards your farm's future. There are a few final items. Today's webinar was recorded. If you missed any portions or would like to share with a friend or go back and rewatch it, it will be available at the end of this week along with the link to their slides. The recordings can be found on the webpage that you registered on, farmcreditil.com/minded. When you close out of the webinar, a brief 3-question survey will pop up. If you could take a few moments to complete that, it greatly helps us to improve future webinar experiences and ensures that we're providing topics that you want to hear about. Lastly, please check out the next webinar in the Ag Minded Hour series. August 24th, we'll be hearing from Kent Reed, Farm Credit Illinois' Chief Appraiser. He'll be sharing insights from our land value studies that will have just been released in mid-August. So you can find additional information or a link to register for that at the same web address that you used to register for today's. Again, thank you for spending an hour with us today, and thanks again to Chris and Carrie for sharing their expertise. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.